Right, so this right here is a question that I guess in some way makes sense, but at the same time, everyone may not agree with it. But I honestly believe that for the most part, it's fair to say that the 2000s, was the 2000s the best decade for the Metroid series. And honestly, that's something that's definitely debatable, especially considering the fact that a lot of people have their own opinion on what Metroid games are the best in specific orders and all that. A lot of people believe that Super Metroid for the SNES from 1993 was the best, Super Metroid game, or basically the best Metroid game that's ever been released. And, you can't really argue with results in terms of how successful it was because I believe when it was released for the SNES back in 93, Super Metroid managed to reach over 1.4 million units in worldwide sales. And then we didn't get to see another Metroid game after that until 2002. And shockingly, that Metroid game was way more successful than Super Metroid. It was I guess way more popular depending on who you ask. And I believe Metroid Prime for Nintendo GameCube sold over 2.8 million units worldwide and ended up being the seventh best selling game on GameCube. In fact, Metroid Prime managed to rival the likes of Grand Theft Auto Vice City in popularity in 2002. And I believe it was named Game of the Year by several gaming publications such as GameSpot, IGN, and GameSpy. And it should be noted that Metroid Fusion was also released around the same time as Metroid Prime. I believe it was either a day before or a day after Metroid Prime came out, and it was really successful as well. And following the release of Metroid Prime in '02, we got to see Metroid Prime 2 Echoes in '04, and we got to see Metroid Prime 3 Corruption in '07. And despite neither installment selling as much as the original Metroid Prime game, following their respective releases, they were both critically acclaimed action-adventure games, and I believe both of them ended up appearing on the Wii console, and the Wii console so happened to be Nintendo's best-selling game console ever. So as far as the 2000s being the best decade for the Metroid series, I guess you could make the argument that it was definitely the most productive decade of the series because we got to see more Metroid games in the 2000s decade than we did in any other decade. We only got like two Metroid games back in the 90s, and I believe that was Super Metroid and Metroid 2, which came out back in 91. The first Metroid game, of course, came out back in, I believe, in 1986. And we did get to see Metroid games in the teens decade, but we didn't really get to see, like, anything that was really, really impressive. We got to see Metroid the Other M, which came out on the Wii console for 2010. It was okay, but it was not as popular as Metroid Prime from '02. We got to see, the remake of Metroid 2, for Nintendo 3DS, which came out in 2017, and that was actually largely successful, and that ended up being quite possibly the best Metroid game of the teens decade. Of course, we had like Federation Force, which also came out, a couple of years ago, and that wasn't really that popular. It wasn't as popular as Other M. It wasn't as popular as any of the Metroid games from the 2000s. So I guess you could say that the 2000s was definitely the most productive decade for the Metroid series, and quite possibly the best because the best selling Metroid game of the entire series came out that same decade as well.